Let me begin by thanking Randy for the invitation, and I've been reading a lot of what everyone here has been writing over the last few months, and a lot of energy on the GOP side this time, which I think is important because I believe in the last couple of campaigns the Democrats have done far better with the new media. I think the Republicans might have been first to the new media and conservatives with talk radio, but I think they've been outcompeted in the last couple of election cycles on the left, actually. So I think it's important to kind of gear up and try to compete and make that playing field fairly level with the Democrats and those on the left. But let me talk a little bit about where I see this campaign and where I see Virginia going. And to do that, I want to go back a little bit. Did anybody here ever look at InTrade.com? It's an Irish. It started off, I think, as an Irish sports book where you could bet on politics, essentially, and it's a market. And so, a lot of political scientists have paid a lot of attention over the years to these markets to see which is more accurate, the market or the poll, on the polling. And InTrade has gotten into, one of the interesting things is that people can bet on these elections, even while the election's going on, if they can find a taker. So like in 2004, if you were a betting person, you could have made a fortune at 4 p.m. if you bet Bush after all the early exit polls said Kerry was winning. You could have got him on about 22 cents on the dollar or something like that. But in this election cycle, InTrade started doing these multiple bets at a time where you could bet, the Clinton trifecta, would she win Ohio, Pennsylvania, and another state. And so I thought, what if you had been given 5 years ago the Virginia, and I had to ask somebody, what is it if you have more than 3 bets? What is it? It's the Superfecta. What if I had given you this Superfecta in 2004, said Tim Kaine's going to beat Jerry Kilgore by a wider margin than Mark Warner beat Mark Early, that George Allen's going to get beat by someone who had very little connection to Virginia politics, that the Democrats are going to take control of the Senate in 2007, and that a liberal from Chicago is going to be the first Democrat to carry Virginia in the presidential race in 2008. 5 years ago, you would have told me, the odds of all 4 of those things happening in a combined way were almost impossible, relatively nil, but they did. And in doing so, I think you have to say that Virginia, in terms of the color scheme of politics, has changed a bit. It's changed from a state that was a red state where a Democrat could win, to a purple state, and then maybe even to a purple state with a little bit of bluish tint. For example, right now, if you look at the polling that is being taken place by the parties, from what I hear, whether it's totally accurate or not, because they each spin, but I hear the same thing in part. And what I'm hearing is that if you just look at basic party ID right now in Virginia, on polling numbers, Democrats outpoll Republicans by maybe 4, 5, 6, 7%, somewhere between 4 and 7%. Now, as I'll get to later, the good news is that Bob McDonnell in particular is polling far higher than the generic number is when you ask and you put him against particular Democratic candidates in the polls. But the sense is that Virginia, over the last 7 or 8 years, has changed in the state, and the dynamic is that the Democrats have made a fairly significant improvement in terms of party ID, general party ID in the state, and that shifts the nature of elections. So the Democrats have had what I consider to be a pretty remarkable run from 2005 through 2008, and that's probably part of the reason why Tim Kaine was asked by Barack Obama to be the DNC chair. And if you had known Tim Kaine prior to 2005, you would have thought that might have been the last position he'd ever wind up in, because he wasn't seen as that kind of person who would be this partisan in chief, you might say. there. So that's kind of the background. And then we come to this election year, 2009. And my own sense is that this is a genuine opportunity for the Republicans to be extremely competitive at the statewide level. It's always troubling in some way, or somewhat unsettling to an individual to think that a tide is going to begin to turn. But my sense is that some of the factors that have made for a very favorable Democratic environment are a little less in evidence this year than they've been previously. So let me kind of take a look at both sides and then try to put them together and see where we are. The Republicans have one major advantage this year is that they don't have an internal fight for the governorship. Now they have their own internal fight. And the question is, will that be dispensed with in time to kind of unify behind Bob McDonnell, Bill Bolling, and whoever gets the Attorney General nomination? But my sense is that McDonnell comes into this race in a pretty good position. If you take a look at the polling numbers, his favorable ratings right now are quite high. And they're not only in the independent polling numbers that you saw the public policy polling out, 50% favorable, 18% negative, which is a very, very nice spread. But those are the margins, I think, that the Democrats are seeing in their polls as well on that front. So McDonnell comes in with a favorable rating. He's done, by all accounts, a good job as Attorney General on that side. And I think he's a good candidate. I think he has good candidate skills. Whether it be his ability on the stump, which I think is getting better and better. I thought when he first ran, he was a person who didn't express his personality very much. I think he's more comfortable with that now. He's funnier on the stump. He's self-deprecating. I thought he was superb, for example, before the Capitol Correspondents at the when they had to tell jokes. And he told this wonderful story that kind of defused one of the attacks against him, I thought, really well. He said, it was right after the Jefferson-Jackson Day dinner, and he got up and he said, I was really worried about what was going to happen last Saturday. He said, because there were 3 Democrats tearing me apart. He said, my ears were going to be burning. He said, I didn't know what to do. He said, so I called up Pat Robertson. He said, and I asked him if he sent a hurricane their way on that front. And I thought his capacity to kind of handle that with some aplomb and joke, because that's going to be one of the lines of the Democratic attacks. I don't know. I think it's a dangerous attack in some ways, but for the Democrats, actually, they've got to be very careful that they're not seen as being anti-religious in general when they make those kind of attacks. And they got to be very careful that they don't repeat to McDonnell what the Republicans tried to do with Obama last time around. But my sense of this is that McDonnell is a well-positioned candidate. He's a good candidate. He has good candidate skills. And from all I can see is I think that Tim Kaine, it's not going to be easy to run against Kaine because I think he's a popular governor, not necessarily because of what he's accomplished, but largely because of his personality, and people think that he's trying to do the right thing. But my sense is that what McDonnell doesn't have, that Republicans have had for a while, has been the Washington millstone around their neck, and in particular was an unpopular president there. And right now, Obama is relatively popular. I don't know what will happen by November. Congress is still very unpopular. And there was a Zogby poll on election night that said that half the public thought the Republicans ran Congress. They won't think that this election day. They'll know who runs Congress, and they'll know that it's Democrats running Congress there. And so I think the national environment changed in a way that, regardless of Obama's popularity, is not as overwhelmingly negative for the Republicans, particularly in Northern Virginia, as it's been. So that's one context change.